Let me say, and I mean this really from the bottom of my heart, that it's a great pleasure to be back in Singapore. I see really before me so many friends and acquaintances that it just makes you feel very good coming back here. Today we are really in a sense entering a new phase of our strategic partnership. And I can't think of a better way of doing that than through an event like this. Now, this is an unbiased statement. The High Commission has always set very high standards, but I think Javed has really taken it to a new level, so I would really like to congratulate him, and I know I speak for all of you in this. So now let me steal a famous Tommy Coe line and say my wife allowed me to make 3 points. So my first big points today. When we came together in the contemporary phase of our relationship, it was a time when the world was changing and India was changing. And the two changes had something to do with each other. India, if you recollect, at that time had a severe balance of payments crisis and was embarking on radical economic reform. And the world was changing. The Cold War was coming to an end. It was very clear that a lot of the assumptions on which the world was working had to be revised. And in that situation, in that juxtaposition, India turned to Singapore. And Singapore responded. We had what was known as the Lucas policy. And Singapore, then under the Prime Ministership of Goh Chok Tong, became a key partner in India's growth and development. It also became a bridge to this region. In 1992, we launched the India-ASEAN partnership, and by 2005, we had become members of the East Asia Summit. During this period, Singapore was a leading source of direct investments into India. Its financial market was a major source of capital through other routes such as external commercial borrowings and foreign portfolio investment. It was a partner in many ways of Indian development and its priorities. And in turn, it was a favored, comfortable destination for Indian companies going abroad. 20% of our overseas investments came to Singapore. Eventually, 9,000 Indian companies registered here. 18 cities of India were connected to Singapore through 500 weekly flights. And quite appropriately, Singapore was the first country with whom we signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. It was my privilege to serve here as High Commissioner. Just as these developments took off, I was here at a time when the CCAR was being implemented. And when I look back over these last 10 years, really there is a lot that we need to congratulate ourselves about. On the political side, on the strategic side, our participation in the East Asia Summit has grown to cooperation in other areas. We have a very robust defense relationship. Singapore, in fact, we've just completed 25 years of uninterrupted naval exercises, which I think is the longest that India has with any country in the world. We've now extended that as a trilateral with Thailand as well. So in both in political, strategic, as well as in the economic, commercial areas, it's very clear that Singapore has become a fulcrum for India's policies east of India. And that today, what started off as a bilateral relationship is something which has grown very much bigger. And part of that is also because on key issues, particularly rules-based order, which Professor Coe symbolizes, we actually think very similarly. The second point, I think we are again at another cusp of history. again where the world is changing, where India is changing. And this new juxtaposition offers new opportunities for the relationship. In geopolitics, it's not just the rise of China and the sharper competition between the United States and China, but the simultaneous rise of several countries, the promise of an Asian century whose realization still has challenges to overcome. There is obviously today no hegemonic power to underwrite an international order, but nor is there a global compact among nations. So we have a situation, the international situation today is under stress, a stress of a very different kind than 1992. We do see multilateralism in retreat. There are question marks about the effectiveness of institutions that we have set up in the last 50 years. And look at the picture in India. The picture in India is actually very different. The picture in India is of a new confident society, whose political landscape is actually seeing changes we haven't seen for 30 years. A government with a strong majority and an enormous mandate. There are massive processes internally to transform the economy and build a more cohesive national framework. We are engaging the world today with more self-assurance and clarity. So, given the fact that we are once again at a moment of change in India, a moment of change in the world, what does it mean for the India-Singapore relationship? I would say that for us, the economics of the relationship will always be important. It is the foundation of our strategic partnership. And India's journey towards a 5 trillion economy, as well as the emerging global economic situation, offer new possibilities. Beyond the traditional areas of cooperation, we have entered the digital age with its own opportunities. We have entered it individually, we have entered it collaboratively and internationally. And areas like fintech today offer again a promise that needs to be explored. India is a country of SMEs in many ways. So when we look at trade, when we look at negotiations such as the RCEP, which is underway, again, it's important both economically and strategically. A trade agreement is a balance of negotiated interests, and certainly where the RCEP is concerned, the economic merits of its terms should be self-evident for it to succeed. Connectivity is another important aspect of our agenda, and beyond connectivity, I think today there is the larger strategic concept or approach or vision, depending on which country you are, of the Indo-Pacific. So how do we engage each other, but in a different landscape, a much more integrated landscape between the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean? I think that too is food for thought. In many ways, Singapore actually is the progenitor of the Indo-Pacific, because by getting India into the East Asian Summit, it actually in many ways facilitated the bridge between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. For India, Prime Minister Modi